Julie. There it goes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, there it goes. You know, sometimes my computer, if I don't do a hard shutdown in the evening, the next day it's sort of glitchy. Okay. Well, it's 6:03. I suggest we get started. And for those of you who are still coming in, it's lovely to see you all. Feel free to put your name and any affiliation you have into the chat. You can also do that directly in your Zoom tile by hovering over the 3 dots in the upper right corner. You can rename yourself, but you all seem to have mastered that already. I am going to share my screen and get us going. So before we do that, here we go. And I do ask that my co-hosts kind of also help me pay attention to people wanting to be admitted into this evening's event. That would be really lovely. So welcome everybody. This is a co-hosted event. I'm Sarah Dooling. I'm with Massachusetts Climate Action Network. And we are doing this evening's Actionar on stopping the Peabody power plant in collaboration with 350 Mass, SAFE, BEAT, the Berkshire Environmental Action Team, Community Action Works, and No Fracked Gas in Mass. So all of our organizations have come together and said, this is an issue we need to talk about and mobilize around. And this evening's agenda includes a welcome. So glad to have you here. Name and affiliation in the chat. Please turn your video off if you don't want to be recorded. And then we have 3 speakers this evening. Julie Smith-Galvin, who's going to provide us an overview of the project and some of the challenges it poses. And then Brita from Climate Code Blue. And Brita will talk about some of the specific health implications for this kind of plant and this kind of location. And then I'm going to wrap us up talking about public utilities, environmental justice, and the need for clean energy. At the very end, I'm going to have some very specific steps for all of us to take. So hang in there. We've got significant amount of information to cover, but at the very end, we have specific actions that we all can take. Okay. With that, I am going to pass the microphone to Julie. And Julie, if you could tell me if you can advance the slides or not, that would be helpful.
I don't think I can, so I will just say
great.
Next slide. How's that?
That sounds great.
I have it on my other screen so I can see where I am. Okay, great. So hi everybody, my name is Julie Smith-Galvin. I am a town councilor in the town of Wakefield. I am also the town council liaison to the Wakefield Municipal Gas and Light Department. However, I am not here in any official capacity. I'm here because about 6 months ago, a constituent came to me and said, hey, Julie, did you know? And these are the things I'm going to tell you I had no idea about. So I'm going to share what I have learned. Did you know there was a power plant being built in Peabody that Wakefield is going to be a part of? Next slide. And so here's a little bit of an overview. Initially, all I knew was that it was a 60 megawatt natural gas and oil peaking plant. And I have spent the better part of the last 6 months digging into any information I could find, questioning the Wakefield Municipal Gas and Light Commissioners, and essentially asking around. So the project is technically called Special Project 2015A. It was never given a fancy name because it's not a fancy project, I think, that was ever wanted to be publicized. It is as I said, it will be powered by natural gas with oil backup. The natural gas will actually require an increase in the natural gas infrastructure, including the installation of a natural gas compressor. What we have heard was from people in the areas, oh, we knew that there was some maintenance happening, on the natural gas infrastructure, but in fact, it's an expansion, kind of being cloaked as a maintenance project. It will require expanded oil infrastructure, including the installation of a new 200,000 gallon oil tank, a 90-foot smokestack, and a 2,500 to 7,500 new, that should say tank, to hold, I'm not even going to try to say it, but essentially these are some hazardous gases that are needed as I understand, kind of neutralizers. It will have some particulate matter pollution, which will be especially disturbing in terms of health consequences, which Burita is going to talk about later. It will emit 51,000 tons of CO2 a year, the equivalent of about putting 11,000 combustion vehicles on the road each year. It is a peaking plant, or what they call a capacity resource. So it is not scheduled to run on a regular basis. It's scheduled to run or will be called upon to run whenever there are peak situations, which are generally at the height of summer or the height of winter. It did clear through what's called the forward capacity market in the New England interconnection system. But there's really nothing to say that it won't be dispatched at other times, particularly in the outer years of its life. It is slated to start construction this spring, which is one reason it is so urgent. And we'll talk in a little bit, but really the urgency has come because the developer has just asked for $170 million in financing or the ability to bond this project. So that's the overview of the project. Next slide. Great. So in terms of where it sits, it's going to be in Peabody, Massachusetts. It's at a site, the address is 58 Pulaski. It is a site that already hosts 2 units totaling about 68 megawatts of old gas and oil peaking power called the Waters River Station. At the time that this was evaluated initially in about 2015, there was no requirement in the state to do a cumulative impact, and so that has not been done. But the fact that this is going to run probably at the exact same time as the other units on the site will certainly have some cumulative impacts. It is within a half a mile of environmental justice areas, which I'll show you in a moment. It's located certainly within 200 feet of the Waters River, and it's on land that's owned by the city of Peabody. The other stations that are situated there are owned by the Peabody Municipal Light Plant. So there are a number of kind of interesting ownership structures here, which we'll get into on the next slide. So this is just an overview, a view. You can see the red box is essentially where it's going to be sited. That is where there's already the 2 units that I talked about and some substations and other gas and oil infrastructure. Down in the lower right-hand corner is Bishop Fenwick High School to orient you. And right across the river, kind of to the left where you see the H, that's the MGH hospital. So it is really right in the middle of town and a lot of activity. And the next slide will show where the environmental justice areas are. So the red star is essentially where the power plant is going to be. And you can see within about a half a mile I guess that's to the south. The dark green indicates that that's a minority and income environmental justice area. The pink is a minority and English isolation area. The yellow is a minority area. And the kind of lime greens are income. So you can see it is fairly situated close to environmental justice areas as defined by the state of Massachusetts. Next slide. This is going to be built and financed and owned by an entity called the Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company, which you'll hear us say MWEC. So that is what it stands for. MWEC is a nonprofit public corporation and political subdivision of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's empowered to issue tax-exempt revenue bonds to finance ownership in energy facilities. So essentially, it's an umbrella organization for a good portion of the 41 municipal utilities that are in the state of Massachusetts. Its board members include 2 members appointed by the governor. And interestingly, and we can see it on the next slide, it is an organization that is very keen on sharing its environmental achievements, but has said absolutely nothing on this project. And so when you look on their projects under development, you can see that it looks like they're doing all good things. And there's no real evidence of this project, of this, special project 2015. Next slide. 14 municipal utilities have essentially signed a power purchase or a purchase and sale agreement with MWEC to buy capacity and other energy services from this project. And here is the list. This is a 30-year contract. I can tell you that the municipal utility in Wakefield has already expended over $800,000 on this project. They will not disclose what it has been on, but my bet is that many of these other 14 have already paid for things, whether it's down payment on contractors or land deals. We just don't know. So you can see here the 14 communities, the amount of, this is capacity that they're going to buy and the percentage of the total. We do have access to the power purchase contract. It is a public document. And so I urge everybody to look at that as well. All of the risk is put on the municipalities. None of the risks is put on MWEC. Next slide. You can see this is just a snapshot. So these are essentially the communities that MWEC has relationships with, and the ones highlighted in yellow are where the capacity is being sold to. So this is not just a Peabody or a North Shore issue. This is a statewide issue. Next slide. What really concerns me as a elected public official is that there has been very little public scrutiny or outreach. I'm not saying anything has been done illegally or anything. Some of it is the nature of the beast of municipalities, municipal utilities. But as far as I can tell, there have been absolutely no public listening sessions. All of the meetings have happened within municipal light departments or MWEC scheduled meetings, and many municipal utilities have elected boards, as they do in Wakefield, and so they do hold meetings. However, most of the information has been discussed in executive session meetings, meaning that no member of the public is admitted to listen to it. Minutes are made available once the information that is discussed is no longer proprietary, but that has not happened. And quite honestly, a good number of utilities, including Peabody, which is the largest purchaser of services from this project, publishes agendas, very, very scaled down skeleton agendas, but has no minutes posted on their website. So some utilities are better than others. I would say Wakefield actually is very good and is now recording their meetings. And we do have recordings of all of my dialogue with them over the last few months. But in general, there's very little information out there. The air quality permit for this project was piggybacked on the existing 68 megawatts permit, even though those 68 megawatts are owned by the Peabody Municipal Light Plant, not by MWEC. So I think there's some possible ownership structure issues we need to look into there. There was no order of conditions review from the Peabody Conservation Commission, despite the fact that when it had its MEPA review, its Massachusetts Environmental Review, it was clearly stated in there that it needed a Peabody Conservation Commission review, but that has not happened. And inquiries to the Peabody Conservation Commission show that they have very little knowledge of the project. So as I said, PMLP does not post their minutes. There's been no information on Peabody's Green Peabody organization, which is a mayoral appointed committee that is supposed to ostensibly oversee these items. And of course, MWEC is now seeking $170 million in tax-exempt bonding from the Department of Public Utilities. We'll talk about that in the action items, but this may be our one opening to be heard. I think that's all I have. I put my contact information there. All of the research that I have done over the last few months is on my my town website, julieforwakefield.com/Peabody Power Plant. And there's all my social media handles and contact information if anybody has any questions. That's all I have, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Julie. That's a really great overview. And as you can tell, there's some ambiguities that we really need to sort out so we know exactly some of the ownership structures going forward. With that, I'm going to advance our slides, and Brita, I will turn the microphone to you and you can just let me know when to advance your slides.
Start out by unmuting. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you this evening. I'm Dr. Brita Lundberg. I'm with Climate Code Blue, which is a physician advocacy group. I'm also chair of the board at Greater Boston Physicians for Social Responsibility. I encourage all of you to have a look at the 3 reports about natural gas infrastructure and specifically about the compressor station in Weymouth, which is now built, and its very serious health and safety risks, which you can find on the GBPSR website. So I like to start my slide here because many people have heard that natural gas is clean, but that is only compared to coal, and that is only at the point of combustion. Coal is just about the dirtiest way to produce electricity that there is, and you can see smokestacks like this. Next slide, please. But when you look at a natural gas tank, often you see something like this in the distance and you kind of feel good. You're like, oh, good, you know, that's that clean energy they talk about. But I'd like to suggest by the end of this talk that natural gas is neither green nor clean. It's not a bridge to anywhere. And it's the unseen pollution from natural gas that may be causing huge harm, both to us and to our planet. Next slide, please. And the caption on that natural gas tank in that New York Times article that I pictured there said, do you see the methane cloud billowing from this tank? And of course the answer is no, but when they changed to an infrared lens through which they looked at this natural gas tank, you indeed can see this leak and it is visible. So in the course of this talk, I'm going to give you the 30,000-foot view of natural gas, its health consequences, and hopefully by the end of this presentation to give you some idea of the risks, the damages that we're seeing across the process chain in Massachusetts and across the country, from the drill rig to the compressor station to our kitchens, and how this fuel is also actually a huge driver of climate change. Next slide, please. So what is natural gas exactly? It's unconventionally extracted from shale rock formations. It's otherwise also known as black shale. In certain parts of the country, especially the Marcellus shale, where we derive our natural gas from, it contains radon and uranium. And the process of extracting it is called unconventional because it involves injecting millions of gallons of a slurry of water and chemicals about 10,000 feet underground. The rock layer will then crack and it releases the gas, which bubbles up to the surface. But as you can imagine, in that process, whatever's in the Earth's crust is also going to be rising with that gas, and whatever is in the chemicals used to extract it will also be in that gas. And it's in fact those that cause many of the health consequences that we see. Next slide, please. So I think most people in this country are not aware, few people realize just how massive this infrastructure is. We have roughly 2.5 million miles in this country of pipeline infrastructure, more than any other country in the world. In fact, our natural gas infrastructure looks like other, say, countries in Europe, public transportation network. And it doesn't look like this in Canada. There are a couple single lines running across the country. This runs through the breadbasket of our country, where the most intensive crops and livestock are, shallowest water systems, most easily contaminated. So when I say that there are leaks throughout this system, you can imagine that it can cause a lot of problems because whatever's in that gas is also going to be getting into your soil, your water systems, and your air. And that's where, in the case of power plants, it's really a problem for us. Next slide, please. So where do the health effects of gas occur? They occur at the local level, the regional level, the global level. I encourage you to take a look at this very brief article, just 3 pages roughly, in the New England Journal from January 2020. I was happy to be a co-author on this. Next slide, please. And there are many of them. Now, when it comes to natural gas power plants, the chief concerns are air pollutions, safety hazards, and noise pollution. I'll just be dealing with air pollution and safety today. I'm happy to answer questions about noise. They are not inconsiderable. Next slide, please. So I think few people realize also what a massive infrastructure this is and what high pressure it travels. These pipelines can be up to 48 inches in diameter. They can travel, the pressure in the pipeline is up to 1,500 PSI. This is a concern because you can imagine when this explodes, and that happens not infrequently, that you're going to have quite a fireball as a result. Just to give you a comparator, the pressure in your tires in your car is 33 PSI. I want you to hazard a guess at what the pressure was in the pipelines in the Merrimack Valley when those pipelines exploded and caused 80 fires and a death. 0.5 PSI, 0.5. That was in a distribution pipeline, very low pressure. It was accidentally overpressurized 12 times that, to 6 PSI. This is running at 1,500 PSI. So what can happen when it leaks? It can change the soil composition. It reverses the gradient. So whereas normally you have more oxygen than carbon dioxide in soil, when it leaks, that ratio is reversed and it essentially kills. That's why you see a lot of tree death. People have talked about methane leaks and tree death. That's why, because it's all CO2. You also, this is actually in your own forest, the Otis Forest in Western Mass. And you can see that they've gone right through the forest, exposing the understory of the forest, which increases the risk of drought, increases the construction of natural gas pipelines, it correlates with the increased risk of forest fires. It also leads to insect infestation and tree death, and therefore it's a less efficient carbon sink. So in terms of climate change, that's also important. Next slide, please. So it might have been hard to imagine that pipeline leaking, but it wasn't difficult at all to imagine this pipeline leaking. This is in Rehoboth, Mass, about an hour south of here. And it reminds us that about 50% of the pipeline in this country is over 50 years old. Next slide, please. And so when you saw that rusted out pipeline, it's not hard to imagine that there are infrastructure leaks all through this process chain, from the drill pad to the processing plants to the compressor stations to our houses. And EPA estimated those leaks at 1.5%. That the European Space Agency, through a new satellite, has upped that to roughly 3.7%. And with that change, that completely erases any benefit that changing from coal to natural gas might have produced in terms of a beneficial climate effect. Next slide, please. So if you live in the city of Boston, you live within a mile of a gas leak. Next slide, please. And why does that matter? Well, when gas leaks, it's more likely to explode. In the case of the Merrimack Valley, pictured in the background here, it wasn't because of a leak that it was exploded. It was because it was overpressurized 12 times what it was supposed to be due to an accident of a human error. But I'd like you to focus on the inset graph here, because a truly alarming trend is that when you look at the age of pipelines, the average incident rate has stayed constant over about the last 30 years. But when you analyze by year of installation, you see that the very oldest pipelines and the very newest pipelines are at the greatest risk of explosion. So whenever you're putting in new infrastructure, you're more likely to see explosions. The most concerning part of this data is that industry has no explanation for why this should be so. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to draw attention to in this slide is that when these explosions happen, industry likes to talk about the PIR, or potential impact radius, also known as the death zone. And often the PIR is 2 times what the estimated PIR is. And so in this case, it was about 700 feet. In fact, it was 1/4 of a mile. When this pipeline, also owned by Spectre Enbridge, which is running the Weymouth compressor right now, it scorched acreage in a 40 acres around this area. A man was caught in his house, severely burned, required a partial amputation. But again, a very sparsely inhabited area. 3 houses burned and 1 burned to the ground. That's not the case where your natural gas power station is going to be put in. Next slide, please. So what about the health effects? So many of the health effects that we see are due to the co-pollutants, the bad actors that travel with the natural gas. These include, and I'll be speaking about in particular, particulate matter and benzene, but they also include nitrogen oxides, ozone, the fluids used to extract the gas, which include benzene, the so-called BTEX chemicals, from the Earth's crust, lead, radioactive radon, uranium, mercury. Next slide, please. Focusing a bit on particulate matter. Particulate matter is just a set of PM 2.5 refers to the size of the particle, 2.5 microns. It's very, very small. It's really a mixture of black carbon, which is just a fancy name for soot, hydrocarbons, nitrogen oxides, metals. The important thing is that 30 of these can fit into the diameter of a shaft of hair. That's how small they are. Why does that matter? Because when you inhale them, first they settle in your very small bronchioles of the lung, where they can aggravate asthma symptoms. They can then pass right into the bloodstream. And when they do that, they have what's called a prothrombotic effect. They increase the likelihood that your blood will clot. When that happens, it can lead to heart attacks. It can go up to the brain and lead to stroke. Exposure to particulate matter leaves patients at a much higher risk for pneumonia and a much higher risk for death from pneumonia, much higher risk for high blood pressure, diabetes. Children are especially vulnerable because of their small size and the fact that they breathe very rapidly. And this accounts for 10,000 excess US deaths a year, 600 of those deaths right here in Massachusetts. Next slide, please. This is concerning because PM 2.5 is increasing in this country. Next slide, please. Oversight is decreasing. In the last 4 years, we've seen a 50% decrease in prosecutions under the Clean Air Act. Interestingly, fracking wells, for example, are virtually completely unregulated compared to other polluting industries. And there are no air monitoring requirements for them. I'd have to look up the statutes about power plants. Next slide, please. And this is a concern because the increase in PM 2.5, according to this report from the National Bureau for Economic Research Working Group, is associated with oil and gas development. Next slide, please. Also extremely concerning, natural gas is associated with hazardous air pollutants and volatile organic compounds. Benzene happens to be both of those. The BTEX chemicals, these are the ones, remember, that are used to extract the gas, are bad actors. They affect the nervous system. They can cause cancer, especially the leukemias. They can cause birth defects. They're endocrine disruptors. And the most important thing is that there's no safe level. So even though levels of benzene, for example, have been sort of approved by OSHA at the work site, you see health effects at any level, just like lead, in fact. And this is concerning because there are elevated levels at the drill rig, at compressor stations, and at pipelines. Next slide, please. This is really concerning in this country because we're starting to build natural gas infrastructure closer and closer to our elementary schools, to where people are living. In this case, this is in Pennsylvania. It's within 630 feet of an elementary school. You know, what state would be crazy enough to do something like that, right? Next slide, please. And what are the health consequences of that exposure? Not surprisingly, it's best defined at the drill rig because there's nothing else around. When you have compressor stations, often they're also near other heavy industry, and so the health effects can be attributed to other things. But drill rigs are often the middle of nowhere, and so the many peer-reviewed studies, over 2,000 now, document the health effects of this exposure. And what are they? More babies being born prematurely, more babies with heart defects, more kids with asthma, more children diagnosed with leukemia. Next slide, please.
Yes, you are too.
So this is of concern because actually it's not just Pennsylvania that is putting its elementary schools 630 feet from a drill rig. Here in Weymouth, Mass, we have just built a compressor station that is 700 feet from the closest home. There are 984 households within half a mile. This structure will emit benzene and other volatile organic compounds 24/7, just with regular operation. Why is this concern? Next slide. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, often the PIR, the burn radius in case there's an explosion, is 2 times that which is predicted. Well, that which is predicted for this structure is 726 feet, but I told you that the nearest home is 700 feet, and there are 900 homes within half a mile. Next slide, please. This brings up an excellent comparison for the situation in Peabody, because very often this infrastructure is located in environmental justice communities. And this is true in Weymouth, it is true with you in Peabody. And so this is an exceptionally vulnerable population. It has 2 environmental justice tracks within that 1.5 miles, within essentially the death zone that would be affected by a large explosion here, and that will be affected by the pollutants that are, as I said, emitted 24/7. This population is in the top quartile of the state for lung cancer, for Hodgkin's lymphoma, for laryngeal cancer, for leukemia, for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, for asthma hospitalizations, COPD, ER visits, heart attack rates, non-white population, age over 65 and under age 5, and population density. This is just one of the maps with the red. Every single map of this area has areas in red. Next slide, please. So I'll just finish by saying that natural gas, I really consider it the secondhand smoke of our time. And I feel like we as physicians, just as physicians in the 1980s were drawing attention to secondhand smoke, saying before you light up, look down. We should be doing the same thing with our natural gas infrastructure, because children are the most vulnerable, and these health impacts are preventable. We don't need to be building these huge expansions of natural gas infrastructure. In fact, for reasons of climate and health, we need to be doing the opposite right now. Next slide, please. So what opportunities might we have to improve health? We can eliminate natural gas hookups. We can create financial penalties for gas leaks. Countries that have done this have seen a 40 to 60% decrease in their rate of gas leakage. This isn't rocket science. Stop building new gas infrastructure and start with Peabody. What I've heard tonight was so concerning. I just can't even begin to say, and goes right in the face of what we need to be doing, which is a rapid transition to solar, wind, and geothermal. Next slide, please. What else can we do? Legislation to protect communities, eliminate government subsidies to the oil and gas industry, require the oil and gas industry to assume the costs of remediation. And then just some general points to things that we can actually do to help. If you cook with gas like I do, please run your kitchen fan. If you cook with gas, I didn't put the slides in about asthma, but there's an increased risk of pediatric asthma if you cook with gas. And remember that there are feedstock industries for the natural gas industry, like road salt and road brine and plastics and pesticides. And so it's something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. The good news of this talk is that cutting air pollution can prevent deaths within weeks. I really like this study on the health benefits of air pollution reduction, showing that asthma, heart attacks, premature births all fall, and so quickly, literally within weeks. Next slide, please. So in sum, the extraction, distribution, burning of natural gas is damaging human health. The human health risks are due to the air, water, and soil pollution produced all along this process chain, or quote, life cycle from the drill rig to our kitchens. Next slide. And just as a New Yorker cartoon, just for a little humor, in a just world, we'd see a pipeline running across a golf course. I don't think I've ever seen this. Next slide, please. And I'm happy to take any questions. Or maybe you want to wait for questions till the end.
Yes, thank you, Brita. I think what I would love folks to do, I haven't been looking at the chat, but if you do have questions, please drop them into the chat. And what I want to do is sort of complement what Julie and Brita have shared so far this evening. And at Massachusetts Climate Action Network, we really are committed to municipal light plants in particular to being part of the climate solution. And that's what we're really committed to. And this Peabody peaker plant gives us an opportunity to kind of reverse what looks like a certain trajectory. I'm just resharing the map that Julie had in her presentation to emphasize that probably most of you on this call know there are privately owned or investor owned utilities, there are public utilities, and MWECI, again, the Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company, represents about 20 of these public utilities. And Julie gave a really good overview of what they do. This is the entity that is really responsible, MWECI, for the resource and risk management for all of these MLPs across, for the ones that are part of the umbrella under MWECI. And MWECI is the entity that took the power purchase agreement for this peaker plant to individual muni districts. And so that's a very important piece of information. Both Julie and Brita mentioned environmental justice, and here we are, we have the climate bill on the governor's desk once again. And one of the biggest improvements from Governor Baker in his amendments was adding the detrimental effects of climate change as a particular hazard or environmental burden for environmental justice communities. And so the map that Julie showed about where the peaker plant in Peabody is proposed to be constructed on City of Peabody land really highlights the risk involved in siting the project there. And so when MCAN thinks about public utilities and energy infrastructure, one of the things we do increasingly focus on is really trying to reduce the threat of our energy system and specific forms of energy infrastructure in these communities that have limited English proficiency, that are typically brown and black households, low income, sometimes moderate income folks, that over time have been exposed to multiple sources of pollution. And that vulnerability in conjunction with threats like this particular peaker plant poses is a particular kind of risk that in the context of the climate bill doesn't add up, doesn't make a lot of sense when our goal really is to decarbonize the grid and democratize the decisions about our energy future, especially for environmental justice communities. And in Peabody alone, just to give you a sense, there are 7 hazardous waste sites of varying, and these tiers represent varying degrees of complexity and toxicity. In addition to those sites, there are 12 what are called large quantity waste generators, and each of these LQGs produce about 5 tons of hazardous waste a year. And it's so toxic that it can only accumulate on site for 90 days, and then it needs to be shipped off site. And I was driving around Peabody this weekend with my sister, trying to get a sense of what it felt like to drive around, to walk around in some of the communities. And then I came back and I sort of did this aerial view, and there is a lot of, Brito was talking about PM 2.5. There is a lot of traffic going around Peabody. It is really a place that's dominated by transportation, in addition to these polluting facilities. So we have a particular community that has experienced chronic health impacts because of these, the way the highway system has developed and the siting of current polluting facilities. One of the biggest messages that we want to offer tonight is that Peabody, what we're looking at right now is MWECI investing in this peaker plant, is the idea that the plant, and I believe Judith already dropped this in the chat, that the plant is going to become what is called a stranded asset over time. And this doesn't make sense from a business investment decision, that this multiple millions of dollars investing in an oil and gas powered infrastructure really contradicts so many of the municipal light plant districts' commitment to clean energy and to being part of the climate solution. This particular project also contradicts the Commonwealth's commitment to get to net zero by 2050, outlined in the climate bill. Moreover, laws that are being developed now will probably force this peaker plant to shut down before the plant reaches its natural end of life. So dropping in an exorbitant amount of money for a piece of infrastructure that cannot be retrofitted, that will probably be taken offline before all of that investment is recouped. So what's the alternative? Clean the peak. We're talking about a capacity resource. And the photo on the right is from a plant in Connecticut. I believe it is a public utility plant, and it is a solar peaker plant. So we understand, 5-10 years ago, some of this some of this clean emerging technology was still in its infancy. But now here we are, there are alternatives to an oil and gas powered peaker plant. And I want to emphasize something that is probably unique to MCAN's role in this campaign. We believe in the municipal light plants. We believe they are powered by people, right? And so generally, as Julie referred to in her opening remarks, a municipal light plant, they are all different across the state. There are typical governance structures. Some have elected members to a light board. Some are appointed to a light board, and some involve oversight by a mayor working in tandem with the Board of Selectmen. So those are some of the important players at the local level, at the muni district level. And the idea is that these municipal light plants own power generation and have more control over deciding where and how to get electricity to residents who are their customers. And so the great thing about munis is that since they are owned and run by the town, that local advocates have a direct voice and can determine how muni money is spent. And so this is a real opportunity. I'm just showing once again the 14 muni districts that have committed to this power purchase agreement. And if you look on the left side here, Peabody Light was founded in 1891. So these munis have a long history of being part of the local community. And this is a great opportunity for Peabody residents in particular. If you look, I bolded Peabody, committing almost 30% of the total energy capacity from this peaker plant. Significant. So here we are. It's up to us. It's up to advocates in Peabody. It's up to advocates across the state to say, hey, munis, hey, MWEC, we can do better. We can absolutely do better. And in terms of MWEC, what we have done is we've put together a petition, and I will share that link with you momentarily, but asking the CEO of MWEC to withdraw the proposal. Let's just stop this now and replace it with a project that is based on clean energy and alternatives, including solar and battery storage. We don't want to burden these environmental justice communities anymore. The time is different now. We are thinking differently about ideas about energy equity, a fair distribution of burdens and access to benefits associated with our energy system. So that's MWEC, and they're an important player. However, so are the 14 muni districts. And so we're asking folks in muni districts, especially in Peabody and Danvers, even though Danvers hasn't signed on, that they get out of this agreement. They figure out how to get out of this contract. And if that's not possible, that we tell these munis to take every measure to get out of their financial commitment. That's really important. We have to clean our grid. So toward that end, there are some very specific actions that we can all take as advocates. And again, this is about holding our munis to a standard that is outlined in legislation, outlined in changing regulatory mandates for munis. And the first thing is writing a letter to the editor. And Rose, I know you're on the call. Can you launch the poll that I created in the Zoom link on the Zoom page? So bear with us. We're going to launch a poll because, you know, as a former teacher, you know, how many of you want to do this? And it's like, I don't want to raise my hand. So let's use technology and get a better sense of who would be really interested in taking this project on. And we have written 3 templates for folks to use to write to their local newspaper editor. One is for Peabody residents themselves. Another template is for muni people who live in muni districts. And the third template is for folks that don't meet either of those criteria. Rose, are you able to launch the poll?
Yeah, I think people should be, it looks like people are taking it.
Excellent. I can't see it at all. So Rose, I think you can share the results. So this is one way of getting
Great.
the
Yeah, looks like we've still got some votes coming in, but a couple.
So this is one really easy way, since you already have a template to work from, to get the word out, to raise awareness about what Brita was talking about in terms of the health impacts, what Julie was talking about in terms of the financial commitment not really aligning with munis being a public utility, requiring open meetings or ideally having open meetings and sharing agendas and minutes available to residents in muni districts.
Great, so we're at 75% participating, so I might report back and then wrap it up. But we got 13 out of 18 respondents said that they would love to, and 2 out of 18 said that they had never done this before and would want some help but might be interested. So that's really exciting. Great to hear that the majority of people is like really raring to go on this. So we'll be in touch about that.
Excellent, thank you. So for those of you who say, I need some help, Sarah, I've never done this before, we're going to be sending a follow-up email. I can help you. It's not a big deal. And so I look forward to those of you who would like some one-on-one coaching on that. That's great. So the main message is we have to protect our communities and it's time to clean the peak. Another thing that I mentioned, we have crafted a petition to the CEO of MWEC. And this is a lot of text here, but the bottom line is that this decision will result in an expense for residents. It poses an unnecessary risk for environmental justice communities in particular, and it creates a stranded asset. And none of that aligns with the current legislative and regulatory strategies around getting the Commonwealth to meet its net zero emissions by 2050. This petition is in our toolkit. We created a toolkit because now, during COVID, even as we are emerging from COVID, a lot of advocacy is happening in the digital world. So Rose from MCAN, who is just sharing the results of the poll, she and I worked on a toolkit that includes some explanatory material up front, just kind of a review about the project, drawing from Julie's website. It also includes sample tweets, sample Facebook posts. So that is intended for advocates to use. And some of the tweets and Facebook posts vary. If you are a Peabody resident in particular, you will have your own content to modify. In addition, we want people to stay connected on this issue because, as Julie mentioned, this is not only about Peabody, right? And as Brita emphasized, there's this massive natural gas infrastructure across our country, including Massachusetts. And so we really want people to stay connected. And towards that end, we have created a Facebook page called Stop the Peabody Peaker. This link will also be in our follow-up email that you will receive after this event. Lastly, as Julie alluded to early on, there are some legal questions we have. We want to make sure that the process that has unfolded so far has fully complied. And towards that end, we need folks to help us get answers. And so we have created a Peabody Legal Fund. It is on MCAN's website. The link is here above the dollar signs. And we are so excited to take any gift you feel you can put towards this effort. Because once we have some legal clarifications around ownership specifically, then that can help us devise the campaign strategies going forward. And with that, I'm just going to say a big thank you to all of our co-hosts this evening: Community Action Works, 350, SAFE, Beat, No Fracs. There was really good collaboration on pulling this event together on short notice. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I've noticed that the chat has been pretty active. And just quickly, I want to reply to Jim. Yes, we are going to be sending out this slide deck in a post-event email with the toolkit, with the petition, and with the donation for the legal fund. Okay, in terms of other questions, okay, no, we do not have a lawyer yet. We have been doing some exploring of potential lawyers, but we have not found one yet to our liking. So for those of you who have been involved either in Weymouth or in other issues related to natural gas or related to, probably mostly related to natural gas, if you have a name, please send it my way. that would be very helpful. And I will drop my name into the chat, my email, sorry, into the chat. Y'all know my name. Okay. Let me see, let me go. Oh, great. So Rose has dropped a link into the toolkit, into the chat and the Facebook group. Okay, from Mary. So Mary's comment in the chat, many of the people in charge who want to build this kind of infrastructure, it would be nice to find out how the plant financially is not a good idea, as well as that could appeal to the decision makers, it sounds like, Mary, about how investing in clean energy is perhaps a wiser financial strategy. Yes, exactly. So part of our letter to the editor template emphasizes the cost of investing so much money in a piece of infrastructure that will be outdated and shut down before it ends its end of life naturally. And so this is like paying top dollar for a dinner that you get kicked out right after hors d'oeuvres. You know, it really doesn't align. I do want to ask, and thank you, Pat, for asking this question in the chat. Is there anybody from Peabody on the call tonight? Aha. So this is part of the challenge, and I think yes, and I think part of our work is to raise this issue, position it as a statewide challenge, but also emphasize that this is happening in Peabody, in these environmental justice communities in Peabody. And so part of our work going forward will be, oh, Ron, are you from Peabody? I'm sorry, I misunderstood your comment in the chat. Is this accurate? Off video, yes, okay, excellent. So we do have a Peabody resident, and so going forward, part of our, yes, door-to-door flyering is an option, but building the awareness of this peaker plant in Peabody. I mean, all of you know energy infrastructure for so many people, especially when they're, you know, overworked, and as we all are, zoomed out and flattened out, and I'm so tired I can't go to another thing, I can't do another thing, right? So we have to make, yes, Dennis, we could reach out to businesses. We have to make the energy infrastructure make it clear that this is part of everybody's life, and it's part of the energy future of Peabody, the future of Peabody in general. In terms of other questions here, are there any other questions?
Sarah, I was just going to answer. I think it was Mary who said, you know, how do we convince communities to get out of this? And I have to say, that's where I started this process, was to just focus on Wakefield. And I spent months with Wakefield. And to be honest, they were very forthcoming with information. But it became pretty apparent to me that it is very costly for any single municipality to exit this unilaterally, which is why I elevated it and brought it to MCAN. Because I think the way we have to go about this is to get MWEC out of this, or get the state to stop this at the DPU level. And then there is an exit clause for all the municipal utilities to get out of this. So I really think that this has to be a concerted effort. I think we have to put pressure on the municipalities one by one, but we also have to think holistically around this. And the other point I just wanted to say, I think the point on the economics is excellent. The reason this project is really financially viable is because they put this into an auction, got a good price on an auction, so they're going to get paid by the system generator, the grid operator, to be available day in, day out, month in, month out for the next 30 years, and they got a pretty good price on that. The truth is they could sell that position in their auction. This is what we need a lawyer to confirm. But we believe they could sell their position, you know, in that auction to probably an offshore wind developer who are desperate to get positions in the auctions. They have a very good price. Prices have come down since they got their price 62%. So they could sell that position to a cleaner resource, probably buy from that cleaner resource and make themselves whole monetarily. But we need somebody who really understands the system to look at that.
I just want to say that is, this is the kind of beehive mentality, right? We have to be able to leverage this existing system toward a clean energy outcome, toward a healthy communities outcome. And so thank you, Julie, for that fabulous idea. It is 7:03. And so I think if there are no other burning questions from folks, does anyone else have one more question? No? All right. So what we are going to do, we are going to save the chat. We're going to save the recording. We're going to do a follow-up email. And Logan is reminding everybody to sign the petition. And we will send out links to the toolkit, the petition, the letters to the editor. For those of you who took the poll and said you want help, we will be in touch and help you work through a letter to the editor. And please join the Facebook group. It's an easy way. I know Jim on the call is not on Facebook. That is fabulous. However, it is an efficient way to have our to maintain our connectivity and stay in contact with each other. And so Jim, maybe you can stay on the Google group and we can go from there. So with that, I just want to thank you all for being on the call. I really want to thank Julie for bringing this to MCAN's attention and outlining kind of the stark contradictions and the the interesting opportunities for trying to reverse what MWEC really wants to have happen. And I want to give a big thanks to Dr. Brita Lundberg, for really emphasizing once again the health risks involved with this kind of infrastructure. And with that, I wish you all a good evening. And yes, thanks, Jim. And please use our toolkit and stay in touch. And we will keep you updated as the DPU process becomes more clear to us. All right. And with that, be well, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone. Thanks.
Hey, Rose.
Hi. There's still a couple of folks here.
Mhm.
I was hoping Logan would hang around a little bit longer.
I think he's probably headed out to dinner or something.
Yeah. He has a healthy work life relationship.
Yes, he does.
Oh man. I'll send you an email about what was going on in the chat on
Please
a
do.
private level. Yeah.
Yes.
Alrighty.
Excellent.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rose.